Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. On each episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live, I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. Our guest today is Gina Taranto. Gina is the Director of Applied Science at ProSearch. Gina, welcome.
Hey, George, how are you?
Great. I'm glad to have you here because we have a very topical topic, if you will, to talk about today. But before we get into that, I'd like you to share with our guests a little bit about how you got to what you do today and what is it that you do today anyway. So what brought you to this?
Sure. So if I take those questions in backwards order, I came to Discovery after getting a PhD in linguistics, and I finished at a time when the demand for semanticists was pretty small in the world. And so I thought about where I might want to apply these skills in linguistics, and kind of law and doing things with words came to mind. So I went to the University of San Diego and did a paralegal certificate just as a way to understand the landscape of law. And this was right after Zuba Lake. This was sort of at a time when search and electronic information was just becoming very, very important in discovery. We were really sticking the E on the beginning, if you will. And so that was the same time that H5 was getting started up in the Bay Area. So I went there, spent about almost 10 years at H5, and then came to ProSearch to really lead up the efforts to apply linguistics to document search and information retrieval in discovery. And so ever since then, I have been here, and 10 years later, I am leading a team of linguists, data scientists, computer, I kind of call them, it's the geeks and heroes who develop and deploy the solutions that support just a whole range of legal discovery needs.
So H5 was the linguists' powerhouse in the e-discovery space. That continues on at ProSearch, I take it?
I think it does, yes, absolutely. We've got a great group here.
Well, what I'd like to talk about today, it's been about a year since ChatGPT barreled over all of us and grabbed up all our available attention, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about
ChatGPT
a year later, generative AI more broadly, not just ChatGPT.
I mean, and that's actually the point. What's really exciting I think it was just a week or so ago that ChatGPT sort of was celebrating its first birthday online. And I think for 6 months, the idea that what ChatGPT is an application that sits on top of large language models to do something that's really cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the difference between a large language model and a chat application really wasn't understood. Like, that was kind of being conflated. So I think we've had just a lot of time to be very excited and inspired by this new way to interact with large data. And now we're really starting to understand technically what's going on, security-wise what's going on, and we're really starting to be able to move a little bit beyond the hype and kind of think about how these technologies are going to transform and help the things we want to do with search and information retrieval in discovery.
Well, a significant number of people I talk with still conflate the chat part and the large language model. Mm-hmm. They treat it all is one thing, and a fair number of them seem to think that ChatGPT is the only implementation of this. Maybe it would help to give a really quick primer on all of this.
So yeah, I mean, essentially the GPT is a generative pre-trained transformer, and that's just a way, it's a specific way of building a large language model. And I think that we talk a lot about how the basic technology is a lot like autocomplete that we're all familiar with when we write text messages. And autocomplete is good over 5, 6, 7 words. When we're talking about these large language models, what we're looking at is completion strings that can consider way more than 5, 6, or 7 words. They can go in 2 directions. They can see what's upstream and what's downstream. And so the ability to sort of organize that information into just a big giant, it's called a vector space. I think about it being of a generation where one of the toys I had growing up were these straws that you kind of stick together with different connectors. So, you're just really able to build these giant spaces that you can't really even imagine, that have neighborhoods and pockets of things that are just sort of ways that this could continue, and so I don't know if I've made it easier for anybody to understand, but I'm trying to make a point of the scale of it. And those large language models are just, I think the important thing is they're just organizing the information. The LLM by itself is just organizing that information. That's what the chat application kind of refers back to when it's trying to complete a new string and sort of sound like a person might.
So for e-discovery purposes in particular, one of the things that we always need to be careful about is that we're dealing with client data. Often that client data is highly sensitive for one reason or another, and we don't want it escaping it out into the world. There's this fear that if you put any client data into any of these chat large language model based systems, you're basically throwing it out to the world. Well-founded, a concern that's not really a concern. Where does this fit?
Oh, it's totally a concern. But again, this is sort of the confusion. There's a version of ChatGPT that one can access by going to the internet and pasting information into sort of the public, version. Then there are commercial versions that get licensed to organizations. So a lot of our clients now, they have internal closed instances of ChatGPT that has been sort of white labeled or rebranded for that organization. So their teams can use it. And there's still a lot to think about when using it. I think you never want someone on your team copying client data and going to just the wide open, right? But I mean, there are ways to put it together. And I think that really gets at one of the things we learned in 2023 is like discovery and kind of this work is always a team sport, but like the size of the team got a lot bigger. We're really working across more organizations. There's a lot more collaboration with InfoGov, with IT, with security, just understanding the actual architecture and everything that goes into making sure that these tools are being deployed in a way that's safe for data.
And that is achievable, right? They can be deployed in a way that is safe for data.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We have heard over the past year varying, I wouldn't necessarily say escalating because it seems to rise and fall, but waves of hype. To believe some of the stuff that's out there, ChatGPT can probably start the day by making my tea for me and laying out my breakfast, and I don't think it can accomplish all of that. So what are you seeing in terms of hype and what's real?
Well, I think the hype is the idea that artificial intelligence or generative AI just kind of comes in and does everything, and that's just not true. Like if we're using right now my team is playing a lot with features like summarization. We can see that that can have a lot of applications for discovery. Things like prediction are things that you can leverage the underlying vector structures to do. But the idea that you just kind of get everything going the first time round, find me all the documents related to baking bread, like probably you're going to need to tune that. And so there needs to be sort of a practice and a methodology around how we fit this technology into a discovery workflow. And I think the good news is that a lot of us have a lot of practice with that. We've been doing it for 15 years, first with TAR 1.0, then with TAR 2.0. So this is another sort of flavor of that. I think the difference is that we'll be able to inject pieces like, AI-powered support at a lot of steps along the way in a discovery pipeline as we build up to solutions that are very much like really transforming what we're doing right now. But I think that it's going to be incremental and it's not overnight, in my opinion.
The flip side of hype, I guess, is fear.
Mm-hmm.
There is the concern, I hear this voiced on a regular basis, that these capabilities are going to take our jobs away, make us superfluous, unimportant, maybe even take over our lives and displace humanity. I'm sure you hear the same types of concerns. What are your thoughts about those?
So my thoughts are we have to practice, and we really need to use the tools and understand how to use them. And again, I say I'm going to repeat myself, but maybe in a different way and with a different anecdote, and just sort of talk about like really the reason that it's important to have sort of a recipe or a methodology. And so when I need comfort, I think of food, and I think of dessert. So about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I don't know, I know that you're a baker, Jacques Pepin, he did a video essay on PBS NewsHour, and it was about how following a recipe can lead to disaster. And what he does is he talks about this time when he was writing a recipe for pears and caramel sauce, where you slice up the pears, sprinkle it with sugar, put it in a really hot oven, and as the sugar melts and the pear juice seeps out, it creates this caramel. You add your milk, whip it up, and that's your dessert. But what he really talks about is when he wrote the recipe, that process took 30 minutes, and the pears cooked and the caramel caramelized in 30 minutes. But the next time, when he did it with riper pears, the pears were cooked in 10 minutes, but the caramel sauce hadn't had a chance to do its thing yet. So he had to take the pears out. And then another time it was harder pears. And so there wasn't enough liquid, and he had to add water. And so I think that the relationship to discovery here is just really that you kind of understand the basic recipe for using technology to help in any kind of discovery workflow. But every single time you have to get in the oven and poke your pears and see if they're cooked. Is this finding what I need it to be finding? Is my caramel also caramelized? And you adjust it. And so I think that the comfort that we have in using these technologies and kind of adopting them is we've very much matured as an industry, and we understand how to measure the way tools are working. We can look and see if we're getting the results we need. We know how to sample for completeness. And so the comfort, I think, and how we quell the fear is knowing that there's no reason to adopt everything immediately. We can take it slowly, adjust the recipe, and kind of make sure that it's working for us in any process.
In the experimentation I've been doing so far with what we're working on internally for generative AI, my overarching impression is that the technology in its current state is most useful if you're a lawyer as a tool that you can use to explore content, investigate content that can get you directionally correct in terms of results. Yeah, whether it is summarizing information or preparing a chronology, but I haven't seen anything yet where I would simply put in the prompt, take the results, and run with them. I think you've, at least for now, always got to check them. How are you seeing that?
Oh, I totally agree. It's really about checking your results, and I think that that shouldn't be surprising. Like the need to check one's work, and I think what's kind of interesting is sort of I mean, even in a court, there's the defense and the prosecution, and there's the judge, and it kind of reminds me of that, like there's three sides to every story. What person one, person two, and the truth. I think the thing that we're going to get out of this new technology is realizing there's way more than three sides to every story. Like we can now interact with the data in new ways that's going to say, there's 17 versions that support this side. There's another bunch of different stories we can actually develop out of this data to support so many versions of the story, and we'll be able to do that earlier in the process. That's I think where it all heads. So I think that the value really comes, to your point, and just getting directionally close to what's happening, just a lot of visibility into what the direction is and what different alternatives are, I think is one of the things that's going to come out of this. And we can kind of check to see, well, what might contradict what I'm saying right now a little bit more easily than we have been able to do that in the past.
Yeah, there was a matter I worked on, it was maybe 20 years ago that we were doing this. We had, at the time, an enormous amount of highly varied data, and we were trying to find the best story to tell from that data, which is what I think these tools help us do. The difference is, at the time, I had in aggregate probably about 50 people. They were linguists, economists, statisticians, econometricians, which is a combination of both, forensic accountants, and any number of other people, all working through the data and with tools like statistical analysis tools like SAS to try to do all of this. And the fastest return I could get on anything was usually several days. We've got a whole different range of possibilities now with speed and cost, or rather much greater speed and much lower cost, no?
I think, sure, much greater speed, sort of. The cost is, I think, where it still gets a little bit tricky, because it's this token model is, paying for input, paying for output, and then the need to go back. Like the whole idea, I think, is that as we tune our models, or if we're actually using a chat application, and so we're asking questions and then follow-up questions, I do think that one of the things we'll be finding out in 2024 is what's the actual cost of using these, the large language model. That said, using them to get a head start, using traditional techniques to follow up and build out that story a little bit more, I mean, that seems like it would be less expensive and quick right now. But I think that's the question before us, and that's what we're working on. I think.
Are there, even for the cost part of it, is there even an order of magnitude understanding of what it is going to cost to use these capabilities in terms of tokens and all of that? Or are we still just trying to sort that out?
I think that we're still trying to sort it out. I mean, I personally am. I know there are others who have a bigger control of that kind of calculus than I do. But I think it's really still, we're working out whether it's good for big matters, small matters. How would we use it in those cases to make it economical? But I think that that's still, again, what we're working on. One of the phrases I use a lot is that we're just at the beginning of our journey here with this technology, and it's true.
There are, I'm going to go back to the fear side of things. There are those who view the introduction and apparent rapid adoption of these capabilities, and I'll emphasize apparent right there, as presenting an existential crisis for the ProSearches and the reveals of the world. That with ChatGPT and similar capabilities, what you offer, what we offer, it's not going to be needed anymore. What are your views on that?
Well, I don't think that's true at all. I think it's the thing that we've seen for the past 50, ever since I've been in this business, is that there is value that can be added by a smart person who knows how to use tools and technology in support of an information retrieval kind of task that's about understanding storytelling, figuring out what went on. There are so many problems to solve. I mean, one of the things is that we spent a lot of 2023 talking about large language models and ChatGPT, but one of the things that didn't go away and didn't go anywhere was short message data, collaboration tools, how this is going to impact that, all of the new data that's being created. Like, I don't think any tool is really going to wrap its technology around it more quickly than a human's going to wrap their brain around sort of the context of what happened between this community of people at the time that created the documents that underlie the matter. I don't know. That was kind of a long sentence.
But I
think
go ahead.
Help. Yeah.
So with that thought in mind, let's try a short-term, medium-term, long-term exercise of, what I think of as gazing into a murky crystal ball through cataract eyes to figure out where all of this potentially will go. So what are the possibilities? How is this going to help the various types of knowledge workers that we all are? Go short term, whatever you define short term as. What will people potentially be able to do better, faster, maybe cheaper, maybe not, than they can do now?
I think one of the short-term things we can look forward to is really getting a handle on a set of documents more quickly, that we have the ability to apply these models across a single document or multiple documents, and kind of that with the summarization, I think, gives us the ability to kind of say, okay, here's a group of documents around this. Let's get some summaries. Let's use tools that take us from that summary back to points in the original underlying data that led to that. So I think that there's a little bit of just bigger context understanding more quickly than we've been able to do before sometimes.
So if that's the short term, where do we go next? Potentially.
I mean, I think, it just, after that, I don't know where we go next. What do you think?
I think for me, it's going to be looking at all the various things that I needed to try to accomplish when I was practicing, when I was working as a consultant, when I was working as an expert witness. What did I need to be able to accomplish, and what in here can help me move that ball down the road and get somewhere faster? And especially on the attorney side, the more it can help me get there faster, the earlier I can make critical decisions. And sometimes the ability to make a decision quickly is of paramount importance. And yet we have processes often which take a long, long time to get you to a point where you can make a decision.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
But then it becomes, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. The things I care about might be completely different from the things that the lawyer down the hall cares about, or the person who is, working as a consultant or whatever it might be. So how do we accommodate that whole range of wish lists, if we even know what they are?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I mean, to me, the most important thing is to sort of start getting the outputs from any of these technologies into the hands of practitioners. I think the reason that it's so hard to come up with specifically what's a middle term and a long-term goal is the change is going to happen incrementally, and it's going to be something that I might not understand right now. So how do we take it to that next thing? But knowing that we're getting more comfortable with the tools on the way, I think I'm confident that we're going to be ready to meet that when we're there.
Yeah. So for example, in the stuff I've been playing around with, it's done an amazingly good job of giving me a broad picture understanding of things.
Mhm.
Whether it's I'm brand new to a data set and I want to figure out who the key players were, what they
Mhm.
were doing when, who was communicating in broad terms with whom, not the specific details. It doesn't help always with that. And sometimes it gets it wrong,
Mhm.
but at least it gets me thinking about things I might otherwise not be thinking about. If I try to use it just, the essentially the straight out of the box type of stuff to identify privileged content, personally identifiable information, things like that, it struggles with
Right.
that type of activity.
And I think the good news is that we've got really good solutions, even for the
Yeah.
first half, the communications analysis. Who's talking
Right.
to who? When is there something that's an outlier from that? Like, we've already got metadata reporting that's really easy to generate without the language models also. So I think that it's the speed with which we'll be able to do that. Once we've identified those communication patterns, our ability to synthesize the documents that were like the evidence for identifying that,
Mm-hmm.
it's right
Yeah.
there for us and able to synthesize more quickly and kind of. I think that the important part to remember is like still a human's got to read those summaries,
Yeah.
and what are we going to do to make sure that they're good? I mean, like, that's a thing. Like, we know measuring precision and recall, but we as an industry don't have standards for judging the quality of something more subjective, like a
Yeah.
summary of a document. So that'll be an interesting thing to play with
I'm
too.
going to do a quick little side trip here.
Okay.
A question that has been puzzling me, and it's really more about precision and recall, although it
Mhm.
applies here, which is that in most of the lawsuits and investigations I worked on, they were only lawsuits and investigations because there was a fundamental disagreement as to what happened. And there wasn't anything that anyone could point to that gave a clear answer to it. So I had my story, you had your story, and we didn't have anything definitive to say which one was correct. How do you measure precision and recall when you don't know truth? I have no clue what the answer is, by the way.
Well, I think you're not really measuring precision and recall
Yeah.
against truth. You're measuring precision and recall against data points that ostensibly would help us determine the truth. So I think that's where relevance and responsiveness kind of come up as the
Yeah. So on that point,
smoking gun, right? Like, the
right.
smoking gun is the truth, and then
Well, yeah. I of all the many matters I worked on, there was one which really did have a smoking gun. I mean, it wasn't literally smoking. There was no actual gun, but it was two pieces of paper that turned it from a products liability lawsuit into an arson and fraud
wow,
lawsuit. Yeah.
smoking
Yeah.
smoldering match, maybe.
No, they the first sheet of paper took all of the. This is a matter where an egg washer started on fire in a factory and did a lot of damage, smoke damage mostly. But the company then brought folks in to clean up everything. They submitted their expenses to the insurance company. The insurance company paid them and then sued the manufacturer of the egg washer. Product liability case. What we got were two sheets of paper the week before trial. The first one had line items for all the things they'd submitted in two columns. One, their actual cost, and two, the higher cost they submitted to the insurance company. At the bottom of the page, they tallied them up and subtracted one from the other to give a difference. The second page took the four owners of the company and the CFO and divided that amount from the first page between the five people, the four owners got a higher amount, the CFO a smaller amount.
Wow.
That was the only truly smoking gun case I have ever had. Everything else has been an accretion of details.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but good luck having anything find that type of thing for you. That's such an outlier. How could any system possibly look for that? But I think, this is me on my soapbox. I think, we should be focusing on how to do a better job of that accretion of details when we don't ever quite know for sure what it is we're trying to figure out. So we don't even know for sure what actually is relevant, which leads me to that question for which I have no answer.
Yeah. And like, that's what maybe this technology will give us the time and the space to do. We get rid of what isn't accretive information, and that leaves us with more of what is to kind of ponder and work on.
Well, with that, we've run out of time and space.
No.
Already. I know. We could pick this up again at a later date.
Love that.
But for today we're done. So thank you, Gina. Gina Taranto, again, is Director of Applied Science at ProSearch. I am George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Gina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, George.